The rain was coming down hard that night in Manhattan. Inside, the Golden Terrace restaurant, the warm glow of chandeliers made everything feel expensive and untouchable. Crystal glasses sparkled on white tablecloths. Wealthy couples laughed over bottles of wine that cost more than most people's rent. And in the middle of it all, moving quietly between tables with a tray balanced on her palm, was a 26-year-old woman named Elena Marquez. She had been working at this restaurant for almost 3 years now. 3 years of saying, "Yes, sir," and "Of course, ma'am," with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. 3 years of watching rich people celebrate birthdays, anniversaries, and promotions while she counted every dollar in her head, wondering if it would be enough to cover this month's bills. Tonight was like any other night. Her feet ached from standing since 4 in the afternoon. Her back was stiff. But she kept moving, kept smiling, kept pretending that this was exactly where she wanted to be. It wasn't. Elena had a secret. A big one. And it sat right there in the corner of the restaurant, silent and beautiful, covered in a thin layer of dust that only she seemed to notice. The grand piano. It was placed near the large windows as a decoration, something fancy for the guests to look at while they ate their $100 steaks. Nobody ever played it. The manager once mentioned they used to have a pianist years ago, but he left, and they never hired another one. Now it just sat there, waiting for hands that never came. Every night, when Elena walked past that piano, something inside her chest would tighten. It was a familiar ache, like pressing on an old bruise that never fully healed. Because once upon a time, not so long ago, that piano could have been hers. 5 years earlier, Elena was a student at Juilliard, one of the most famous music schools in the world. She had earned a full scholarship, something that almost never happened for a girl from a poor neighborhood in Queens. Her teachers said she had a rare gift. Her fingers moved across the keys like they were born to do nothing else. She played with feeling, with passion, with a kind of fire that made people stop and listen. Her mother, Rosa, used to sit in the back row during every performance, crying happy tears and clapping the loudest. Rosa had worked 2 jobs her whole life just to give Elena a chance at something better. She cleaned office buildings at night and worked at a laundromat during the day. Her hands were rough and tired, but her heart was full of dreams for her only daughter. "You're going to be somebody," Rosa would say, holding Elena's face in her hands. "You're going to play in the big concert halls. People all over the world are going to hear your music." Elena believed her. She practiced for hours every day, sometimes forgetting to eat or sleep. She was so close to making it. Just 1 more year at Juilliard, and she would graduate. Doors would open. Opportunities would come, but life had other plans. It started with a cough. Rosa tried to hide it at first, waving it off like it was nothing. But then came the fevers, the weight loss, the nights when she could barely get out of bed. The doctors ran test after test. And finally, they had an answer. Rosa had a rare autoimmune disease. Her own body was attacking itself from the inside. The treatment was expensive, very expensive. And even with insurance, the bills started piling up faster than Elena could count. Elena tried everything. She took out loans. She worked part-time jobs between classes. She sold anything she could. But it wasn't enough. It was never enough. The hospital wanted payments. The landlord wanted rent. The pharmacy wanted money for medications that kept Rosa alive. One night, Elena sat alone in her tiny apartment, staring at a stack of bills that reached almost a foot high. Her eyes were red from crying. Her hands, those same hands that had once made beautiful music, were shaking. She made a decision that night, the hardest decision of her life. The next morning, she walked into the Juilliard administration office and withdrew from the program. Her professors begged her to stay. They offered to help, to find some other way. But Elena knew there was no other way. Every hour she spent in class was an hour she wasn't working. Every dollar spent on tuition was a dollar that could go toward her mother's treatment. So she left. She packed up her dreams and put them away like old clothes that no longer fit. For the first few months, she told herself it was temporary. She would take care of her mother, pay off the bills, and then go back. She would pick up right where she left off. But months turned into years. The bills never stopped coming. Rosa's condition would improve, then get worse, then improve again. It was a constant battle, and Elena was too tired to fight for anything else. She found the job at the Golden Terrace through a friend of a friend. The tips were good. The hours were long. And slowly, painfully, she started to forget what it felt like to play. Not completely, of course. Some things you never forget. But the fire inside her, that burning need to create music, started to fade. It became a quiet whisper instead of a roar. Most days, she could ignore it. Most days, she could convince herself that this was fine. That plenty of people gave up their dreams and still lived happy lives. But then she would walk past that piano. And for just a moment, her fingers would twitch at her sides, remembering what it felt like to fly across those black and white keys, remembering what it felt like to be free. Tonight, as she cleared empty plates from table 7, she glanced at the piano again. The rain was still falling outside, streaking down the tall windows like tears on glass. The restaurant was busy, filled with the usual crowd of businessmen and socialites. Nobody noticed Elena looking at the piano. Nobody ever did. To them, she was invisible. Just another waitress in a black uniform, there to serve and disappear. She turned away and headed back toward the kitchen, balancing the heavy tray on her arm. Her mother had a doctor's appointment tomorrow. There was a new medication they wanted to try. But Elena already knew what that meant. More money. More shifts. More pretending that everything was okay. She pushed through the kitchen doors and set the tray down harder than she meant to. One of the cooks looked up, raised an eyebrow, then went back to his work without saying anything. Elena took a deep breath. She had 10 more tables to serve before her shift was over. 10 more smiles to fake. 10 more hours of being nobody. She didn't know that everything was about to change. She didn't know that somewhere outside, walking through the rain toward this very restaurant, was a man who would see what nobody else had seen in years. She didn't know that tonight, the piano in the corner would finally be played again, and she had no idea that by the end of the night, cameras would be rolling, strangers would be crying, and her life would never be the same. But for now, Elena wiped her hands on her apron, fixed her tired smile, and walked back out onto the floor. Just another Tuesday night. Just another shift, or so she thought. The front door of the Golden Terrace opened just after 8 o'clock. A gust of cold, wet air swept into the warm restaurant. And with it came a man nobody recognized. He was in his mid-60s, with silver hair that was damp from the rain, and a face full of deep lines that told the story of a long life. He wore a simple gray coat, slightly wrinkled, and carried no umbrella. His shoes were nice but not flashy. There was no expensive watch on his wrist, no designer bag in his hand. He looked like someone's grandfather, maybe a retired teacher or a small business owner who had done okay for himself. The hostess at the front desk barely glanced at him. She was busy on her phone, scrolling through something that made her smile. When she finally looked up, she gave him the kind of polite but distant greeting she reserved for guests who probably wouldn't tip well. "Table for one?" she asked. The man nodded. "Yes, please. Somewhere quiet, if you have it. Maybe near that piano." The hostess shrugged and grabbed a menu. "Follow me." She led him to a small table by the window, just a few feet away from the grand piano that nobody ever played. The man thanked her warmly, but she was already walking away, back to her phone. He sat down slowly, taking his time. He didn't open the menu right away. Instead, he looked around the restaurant with calm, curious eyes. He watched how the waiters moved, how they spoke to each other when they thought no one was listening. He noticed the small things, the way one busboy helped another carry a heavy tray, the way a young waiter rolled his eyes behind a difficult customer's back. This man had a habit of watching people. It was something he had done his whole life, long before he became one of the richest men in America. His name was Richard Thornton, and 30 years ago, he had started a small technology company in his garage. That company was now worth billions. His face had been on magazine covers. His name was in history books. But tonight, sitting alone in this restaurant, he looked like nobody special at all. That was exactly how he wanted it. Richard had learned a long time ago that money changed how people treated you. When they knew you were rich, they smiled wider, laughed louder, agreed with everything you said. It was exhausting. So whenever he could, he slipped away from his world of private jets and board meetings. He put on his old coat, left his security team behind, and walked into places like this, just to remember what real life felt like. Tonight, he had been walking through the city when the rain started. He ducked into the first restaurant he saw, not knowing anything about it. Now, as he sat by the window watching the raindrops race down the glass, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: peace. A few minutes later, a waitress approached his table. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. Her uniform was clean and pressed, but there was something tired about her. Not lazy tired. The kind of tired that comes from carrying too much weight for too long. "Good evening," she said, and her voice was soft but steady. "Can I get you something to drink while you look at the menu?" Richard looked up at her and smiled. "Just water for now, thank you." She nodded and started to turn away, but Richard spoke again. "Busy night?" The question surprised her. Most customers didn't make small talk. They ordered, ate, paid, and left. But this man was looking at her like he actually wanted to know. "It's not too bad," she said. "Tuesdays are usually slower." "What's your name?" he asked. "Elena," she answered. "Elena," he repeated, like he was tasting the word. "That's a beautiful name. How long have you worked here?" She hesitated. Something about this man felt different. He wasn't being creepy or rude. He seemed genuinely curious, like a grandfather asking about her day. "Almost 3 years, she said. 3 years. Richard nodded slowly. "That's a long time. Do you like it?" Elena opened her mouth to give her usual answer, the one she gave to everyone. "Yes. It's great. I love it here. The people are wonderful." But something stopped her. Maybe it was the way he was looking at her. Patient and kind, like he had all the time in the world. Maybe it was just the exhaustion finally catching up with her. "It pays the bills," she said quietly. "I'll get your water." She walked away quickly, embarrassed that she had said even that much. What was wrong with her? She never talked to customers like that. She never let them see behind the mask. Richard watched her go. There was something about that young woman that caught his attention. A heaviness in her shoulders. A sadness hiding behind her polite smile. He had seen that look before. Many times. It was the look of someone whose dreams had been put on a shelf, gathering dust. When Elena came back with his water, Richard ordered a simple meal: grilled fish, vegetables, nothing fancy. She wrote it down and started to leave, but then Richard did something unexpected. "That piano," he said, gesturing toward the corner. "Does anyone ever play it?" Elena froze. Her pen stopped moving. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Then, slowly, she turned back to face him. "No," she said. "Not anymore. They used to have someone, but he left years ago. Now, it just sits there." "What a shame," Richard said. "It's a beautiful instrument. Steinway, if I'm not mistaken. Must be worth a fortune." Elena looked at the piano, and Richard saw something flicker across her face. It was quick, just a flash. But he caught it. Pain. Longing. Something deep and personal that she quickly tried to hide. "Yes," she said. "It's a shame." She hurried away to put in his order. Richard sat back in his chair, thinking. He had built his fortune by reading people, by seeing what others missed. And right now, every instinct he had was telling him there was a story here. That young waitress knew something about that piano. Maybe she used to play. Maybe she still did. Either way, there was a connection there. one she was trying very hard to hide. Over the next hour, Richard ate his dinner slowly. He watched Elena move through the restaurant, serving tables, carrying trays, smiling at customers who barely noticed her. She was good at her job, efficient, and professional, but every now and then, when she thought no one was looking, her eyes would drift to the piano in the corner. When she came to refill his water glass, Richard made his move. "Can I ask you something, Elena?" She looked at him cautiously. "Of course. Do you play?" The question hit her like a punch to the chest. Her hand trembled slightly, and a few drops of water spilled onto the white tablecloth. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, grabbing a napkin to clean it up. "I'm so clumsy tonight." "It's okay," Richard said gently. "Please, don't worry about it. I didn't mean to upset you." "I mean to upset you," Elena shook her head, trying to compose herself. "You didn't. I just... No. I don't play. Not anymore. But you used to." It wasn't a question, it was a statement. And the look in Elena's eyes told him he was right. "A long time ago," she whispered. "Another life." Richard leaned forward slightly. His voice was soft, almost fatherly. "I used to play too," he said. "Very badly. I'm afraid. My wife was the talented one. She could sit at a piano and make the whole world disappear. She passed away 5 years ago, and I haven't heard music like that since." Elena's expression softened. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you," Richard said. "But I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you because I can see something in you, Elena. Something you're trying very hard to bury. And I'm just a foolish old man. But I've learned that buried things don't stay buried forever. They find a way out. One way or another." Elena didn't know what to say. Her throat felt tight. This stranger, this random customer on a rainy Tuesday night, had looked right through her in a way no one had in years. "Would you play something?" Richard asked. "Just one piece. For a lonely old man who misses beautiful music." Elena almost laughed. "Sir, I can't. I'm working. My manager would never allow it." Richard smiled. "What if I spoke to your manager? What if I asked very nicely?" "Signs. It wouldn't matter. I haven't played in years. I wouldn't even remember how." "Music isn't something you forget," Richard said. "It lives in your hands, in your heart. It's waiting for you. I can see it." Elena stared at him. Her heart was pounding. Part of her wanted to run away, to pretend this conversation never happened. But another part, a part she had silenced for so long, was screaming at her to say yes. Before she could answer, Richard stood up. He straightened his coat and walked toward the back of the restaurant where the manager stood checking reservations on a computer screen. Elena watched, unable to move, as the old man approached her boss. She saw them talking. Saw the manager's face go from annoyed to confused to shocked. The manager's eyes went wide. His whole posture changed. He nodded quickly, almost nervously, and then looked over at Elena with an expression she had never seen before. Richard walked back to his table and sat down. He looked at Elena with a gentle smile. "Your manager says it's fine. Whenever you're ready." Elena's mouth went dry. Her hands started to shake again. The piano sat there in the corner, silent and waiting, just like it had been for 3 long years. And for the first time since she walked away from Juilliard, Elena felt the music inside her begin to stir. Elena stood frozen in the middle of the restaurant. Her feet felt like they were glued to the floor. The piano was only 20 steps away, maybe less, but it might as well have been on the other side of the world. Her manager was staring at her with wide eyes, nodding encouragingly like his life depended on it. Whatever Richard had said to him, it had clearly made an impression. Later, Elena would find out that her manager had recognized the name Richard Thornton. He had nearly dropped his tablet when he realized who was sitting at table 9. But Elena didn't know any of that yet. All she knew was that a kind old man had asked her to play. And for some reason, she couldn't say no. She looked at Richard. He was sitting calmly at his table, hands folded, watching her with patient eyes. He gave her a small nod, the kind a father might give a nervous child before a school play. "You can do this," that nod seemed to say. "I believe in you." Elena took a deep breath. Then another. Her heart was beating so hard she could hear it in her ears. Slowly, she untied her apron and set it down on an empty chair. Her hands were trembling as she walked toward the piano. The restaurant had started to notice something was happening. Conversations grew quieter. Heads turned. A woman at a nearby table whispered to her husband, asking what was going on. A few people pulled out their phones, curious, expecting some kind of entertainment. Elena reached the piano and stopped. She stood there looking at it like it was an old friend she hadn't seen in years. The black wood was polished and smooth. The keys were perfect, white and black, waiting in silence. She pulled out the bench and sat down. The leather was cool beneath her. She placed her fingers on the keys but didn't press them. Not yet. For a moment, she just sat there, eyes closed, breathing. Memories flooded back. She remembered her first piano lesson when she was 6 years old, sitting on a stack of phone books because she was too small to reach the keys. She remembered her mother standing in the doorway, watching with tears in her eyes. She remembered the countless hours of practice, the sore fingers, the frustration and the joy. She remembered Juilliard, the scholarship, the teachers who told her she had something special, and she remembered the day she walked away from all of it. A single tear slipped down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly, hoping no one saw. Then she opened her eyes, lifted her hands, and began to play. The first note rang out clear and pure, cutting through the quiet restaurant like a bell. It was followed by another, then another, building slowly into something beautiful. Elena had chosen Chopin's Ballade No. 1-inch G minor, a piece she had performed dozens of times at Juilliard. It was complex, emotional, and demanding. It required everything a pianist had to give. At first, her fingers felt stiff. It had been so long. The notes came out hesitant, uncertain, like a voice that had forgotten how to speak. But then, something shifted. The music began to take over. Her hands remembered what her mind had tried to forget. Within seconds, Elena was lost. The restaurant disappeared. The people, the tables, the chandeliers, all of it faded away. There was only her and the piano, speaking a language that needed no words. The music poured out of her like water from a broken dam, years of emotion rushing forward all at once. She played with her whole body. Her shoulders swayed, her head moved with the rhythm. Her fingers danced across the keys with a speed and grace that seemed almost impossible. Every note carried weight, every phrase told a story. It was not just a performance. It was a confession. The guests in the restaurant had gone completely silent. Forks were set down, glasses were forgotten, conversations stopped mid-sentence. Even the staff had stopped working. Waiters stood still with trays in their hands. The cooks had come out of the kitchen and were watching from the doorway. A woman near the front of the restaurant had tears streaming down her face. She didn't even bother to wipe them. Her husband reached over and took her hand, squeezing it tightly. At another table, a businessman who had been checking his phone all evening finally put it down. He stared at Elena with his mouth slightly open, completely captivated. The people who had taken out their phones to record had stopped recording. They just watched, too moved to do anything else. Richard sat perfectly still. His eyes never left Elena. He had seen many things in his life. Met presidents and kings. Attended concerts by the world's greatest musicians. But this was different. This was raw, unpolished, real. This was a woman pouring her soul into an instrument that she had been separated from for far too long. His late wife had played with that same kind of passion. He could see it now. Could feel her presence in the room, as if she had brought him to this restaurant on this rainy night for exactly this reason. Elena reached the middle section of the piece, where the music grew darker and more intense. Her fingers flew across the keys. The notes came faster, louder, building toward something explosive. She was no longer thinking. She was no longer trying. She was simply being. The restaurant held its breath. Then came the climax. The music swelled, filling every corner of the room. It was powerful and heartbreaking and beautiful all at once. Elena leaned into the piano, her whole body shaking with the effort. Tears were flowing freely down her face now. But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. For 3 years, she had kept everything locked inside. The grief, the frustration, the loneliness, the regret. All of it had been buried deep, hidden behind a polite smile and a clean uniform. But now, through this music, it was finally coming out. The final notes approached. The melody slowed, grew softer, more tender. Elena's fingers moved gently now. Like a whisper after a storm, the last chord hung in the air for a long moment, pure and perfect. And then silence. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the soft patter of rain against the windows. Elena sat at the piano with her head bowed, her hands still resting on the keys. She was breathing hard. Her whole body was trembling. She felt empty and full at the same time, like something heavy had been lifted off her chest. Then, from somewhere in the back of the restaurant, someone started clapping. It was Richard. He was on his feet, his old hands coming together, slowly but firmly. His eyes were wet. One by one, others joined in. The woman who had been crying stood up. Her husband followed. Then, the businessman. Then, a young couple by the window. Then the waiters, the busboys, the cooks who were still standing in the kitchen doorway. Within seconds, the entire restaurant was on its feet, applauding. Elena looked up, stunned. She had almost forgotten where she was. The faces around her were filled with emotion. Strangers were wiping their eyes. Some were shaking their heads in disbelief. Others were smiling through their tears. She stood slowly, her legs unsteady, and gave a small, awkward bow. She didn't know what to do. She didn't know what to say. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was just a waitress. She wasn't supposed to be standing here, receiving applause like she was someone important. But the clapping continued. It grew louder. Someone in the back shouted, "Bravo!" and others echoed it. Richard walked toward her. The crowd parted to let him through. When he reached her, he didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, looking at her with an expression of deep respect. Then, very softly, he asked the question that would change everything. "Why did you stop?" Elena looked at him. Her voice was barely a whisper, broken and raw. "Life," she said. "Life happened." Richard nodded slowly, as if he understood more than she had spoken. "Tell me," he said. "Tell me everything." And for the first time in 3 years, Elena did. The applause slowly faded, but the energy in the restaurant remained. People were still whispering to each other, still wiping their eyes, still looking at Elena like she had just performed some kind of miracle. The manager rushed over and guided Elena and Richard to a quiet corner booth, away from the curious stares. He brought them water and coffee without being asked, his hands shaking slightly as he set down the cups. Whatever Richard had told him earlier, it was clear that the manager now understood he was dealing with someone very important. Elena sat across from Richard, her hands wrapped around the warm coffee cup. She felt exposed, like someone had peeled back her skin and shown the whole world what was underneath. Part of her wanted to run away, to go back to being invisible. But another part, a part that had been sleeping for 3 years, felt awake for the first time in forever. Richard waited patiently. He didn't push. He didn't ask again. He just sat there, giving her space to find her words. Finally, Elena spoke. "I was at Juilliard," she began, her voice still rough from crying. "Full scholarship. I was in my 3rd year when it happened." She paused, took a sip of coffee, and continued. "My mother got sick, really sick. It's called lupus, but hers was a severe type that attacked her kidneys, her lungs, everything. The doctors said she needed specialized treatment, medications that cost thousands of dollars a month. Even with insurance, we couldn't afford it." Richard listened without interrupting. His eyes were soft, full of understanding. "I tried to do both," Elena said. "School and work. I took night shifts at a diner, weekend shifts at a grocery store. I sold my jewelry, my books, anything I could, but it wasn't enough. The bills kept coming. The hospital started calling every day. My mother was getting worse, and I was falling asleep in class because I hadn't slept in days. She looked down at her hands, the same hands that had just played Chopin like her life depended on it. One night, I came home and found my mother on the floor. She had collapsed, trying to make herself dinner, because I wasn't there. I called the ambulance, rode with her to the hospital, and sat in the waiting room for 6 hours not knowing if she was going to live or die. Elena's voice cracked. She took a moment to steady herself. She survived. But that night, I made a decision. I couldn't keep splitting myself in two. My mother needed me. She had sacrificed everything for me my whole life. She worked 2 jobs so I could take piano lessons. She never bought anything for herself. Everything she had, she gave to me, and now she was lying in a hospital bed, alone, because I was too busy chasing a dream. She looked up at Richard, her eyes red but clear. So I quit. I withdrew from Juilliard the next day. My professors tried to stop me. They said I was making a mistake, that I had too much talent to throw away. But I couldn't listen. All I could think about was my mother. Richard nodded slowly. And the piano? I couldn't play anymore, Elena said. Every time I sat down at a keyboard, I felt guilty. Like I was being selfish. Like I was putting myself before her. So I stopped. I told myself it was temporary. That I would go back someday when things got better. But things didn't get better. They just got different. The bills didn't stop. My mother's condition didn't go away. It's managed now, but it's never really gone. And somewhere along the way, I just forgot who I used to be. She laughed bitterly. Or maybe I didn't forget. Maybe I just buried it so deep that I wouldn't have to feel the pain anymore. Richard was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle. Do you know who I am, Elena? She shook her head. You said your name was Richard. That's all I know. He smiled. My full name is Richard Thornton. About 30 years ago, I started a small technology company in my garage. It grew into something much bigger than I ever expected. These days, people call me a billionaire. Though I've never been comfortable with that word. Elena's eyes went wide. She had heard the name before. Everyone had. Richard Thornton was one of the most successful businessmen in America. His company had changed the way people used computers. His face had been on magazine covers, and he had just been sitting in her restaurant, ordering grilled fish like a regular person. I don't understand, she whispered. Why are you here? Why did you ask me to play? Richard leaned forward. After my wife passed away, I didn't know what to do with myself. We never had children. My work had always been my life. But suddenly it felt empty, so I started a foundation. We find people who have had to give up their dreams because life got in the way. Artists, musicians, writers, scientists, people with extraordinary gifts who were forced to choose between their talent and their survival. He paused, making sure she was listening. Tonight, I walked into this restaurant by accident. I was just trying to get out of the rain. But then I saw you. And I saw the way you looked at that piano. I've seen that look before, many times. It's the look of someone who lost something precious and is trying very hard not to think about it. Elena couldn't speak. Her throat was too tight. I asked you to play because I wanted to see if I was right. Richard continued. And I was. Elena, what you just did out there was extraordinary. You played with more feeling, more passion, more raw emotion than most professional musicians I've ever heard. And you did it after not touching a piano for 3 years. Do you understand how remarkable that is? She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks again. Richard reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small card. He slid it across the table to her. My foundation will pay for your mother's treatment. All of it. Every medication. Every doctor's visit. Everything. You'll never have to worry about those bills again. Elena stared at the card, unable to believe what she was hearing. "And," Richard continued, "I want to sponsor your return to Juilliard. Full tuition, living expenses, everything you need. You can finish what you started. You can become the pianist you were always meant to be." "Why?" Elena asked, her voice breaking. "Why would you do this? You don't even know me." Richard smiled, and there was something sad and beautiful in his eyes. "My wife used to say that music doesn't lie. It shows who you really are. Deep down, in places where words can't reach. Tonight, I heard who you are, Elena, and I heard someone extraordinary, someone who deserves a second chance." Elena broke down completely. She covered her face with her hands and sobbed. 3 years of pain and hope and fear pouring out all at once. Richard didn't try to stop her. He just sat there, patient and kind, like he had all the time in the world. When she finally looked up, wiping her face with a napkin, she saw that they were no longer alone. A man in an expensive suit was standing a few feet away, waiting politely. "Excuse me," the man said. "I'm sorry to interrupt. My name is David Chen. I'm a music producer. I was having dinner with my wife when you played." He held out a business card, his hand trembling slightly. "I've worked with some of the best musicians in the world," he said. "Grammy winners, concert pianists, orchestras. But I have never, in 20 years of doing this, heard anything like what you just did. When you're ready, I want to record your first album. Just call me. Please." Elena took the card, her hand shaking. She looked at Richard, then at David, then back at the cards in her hand. 2 small pieces of paper that represented everything she had lost and everything she could become. "This can't be real," she whispered. Richard stood up slowly. He buttoned his coat and looked down at her with a warm smile. "It's real, Elena. Sometimes when we least expect it, life gives us a second chance. The question is, what will you do with it?" He placed some money on the table, far more than his meal had cost, and turned to leave. But before he walked away, he stopped and looked back at her one more time. "I'll be in touch soon. Take care of your mother. And don't forget who you are. The world needs to hear your music." Then he walked out of the restaurant and disappeared into the rainy night. Elena sat alone in the booth, holding 2 business cards that had the power to change everything. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, and somewhere deep inside her chest, for the first time in 3 years, she felt something she had almost forgotten: hope. 6 months later, on a cold December evening, Elena stood backstage at Carnegie Hall. She was wearing a long black gown that flowed like water when she moved. Her hair was done up in an elegant twist. Her makeup was perfect, applied by professionals who had fussed over her for nearly an hour. She looked like a completely different person from the tired waitress who had served tables at the Golden Terrace. But inside, her heart was pounding just as hard as it had on that rainy Tuesday night when everything changed. Through a gap in the curtain, she could see the audience filling the seats. Over 2,000 people had come to hear her play. Critics from major newspapers, music professors from universities across the country, recording executives, famous musicians, and somewhere out there, in the very front row, was the person who mattered most: her mother. Rosa Marquez sat in a cushioned seat, wearing a beautiful blue dress that Elena had bought for her just last week. Her cheeks were full again, her skin glowing with health. The new treatment had worked better than anyone expected. The disease wasn't gone, but it was under control. For the first time in years, Rosa could walk without getting tired. She could laugh without coughing. She could live without fear. And tonight, she would watch her daughter perform at one of the most famous concert halls in the world. Rosa held a bouquet of red roses in her lap, her hands trembling slightly with excitement. Beside her sat an empty seat with a small, reserved sign on it. That seat was for Richard Thornton, though Rosa didn't know if he would actually come. He was a busy man, after all. He had done so much for them already, but Elena knew he would be there. He had promised. The past 6 months had felt like a dream. After that night at the restaurant, everything moved quickly. Richard's foundation had contacted Elena within days. They arranged for her mother to see the best specialists in New York. They paid every bill, every medication, every expense, without hesitation. And then came the call from Juilliard. Her old professors had heard what happened. They wanted her back, not just as a student, but as someone special, someone whose story had already begun to spread through the music world. The waitress who played Chopin and made an entire restaurant cry. The girl who gave up everything for her mother and was now getting a second chance. Elena had returned to school with a hunger she had never felt before. She practiced 8 hours a day, sometimes more. She worked with coaches, studied with masters, pushed herself harder than she ever had, and when the time came for her to perform at the year-end showcase, something unexpected happened. A video surfaced online. Someone at the restaurant that night had recorded her playing on their phone. They had posted it months ago, but it had sat unwatched until a music blogger stumbled across it. Within a week, it had been viewed over 10 million times. Comments poured in from around the world. People were moved to tears. They shared it with their friends, their families, their co-workers. The video was everywhere, and suddenly, everyone wanted to know who Elena Marquez was. Interview requests came flooding in. Record labels started calling. Concert venues reached out with offers. It was overwhelming, almost too much to handle. But through it all, Elena kept her focus. She wasn't doing this for fame or money. She was doing it because she had been given a gift, and she wasn't going to waste it again. Tonight's concert at Carnegie Hall was the culmination of everything. It was her official debut, her introduction to the world as a serious artist. The tickets had sold out in less than an hour. People had flown in from other countries just to hear her play. And Elena was terrified. She peeked through the curtain again. The seats were almost full now. She could see Rosa talking to the woman next to her, probably bragging about her daughter like she always did. The sight made Elena smile, even as her stomach churned with nerves. Then she saw him. Richard Thornton walked slowly down the aisle, his silver hair neatly combed, wearing a simple dark suit. He moved carefully, like a man who had learned to take his time. When he reached the front row, Rosa looked up and recognized him. She stood immediately and hugged him like he was family, because in a way, he was. Elena watched them talking and laughing, two people whose lives had been brought together by music and kindness and a little bit of fate. Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away. She couldn't cry now. Not yet. A stagehand appeared beside her. 5 minutes, Miss Marquez. Elena nodded. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes. She thought about everything that had led to this moment. The years of practice as a child, the scholarship to Juilliard, her mother's illness, the hospital bills, the long nights at the restaurant, the piano gathering dust in the corner, the old man who asked her to play. All of it had led here. When she opened her eyes, she felt calm. The fear was still there, but it was smaller now, pushed aside by something stronger. Purpose, gratitude, love. The lights in the auditorium dimmed. A hush fell over the crowd. Through the speakers, a voice announced her name. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Elena Marquez. The curtain parted, and Elena walked onto the stage. The applause was thunderous. 2,000 people clapping, cheering, some already on their feet. Elena walked to the center of the stage, where a beautiful grand piano waited under a single spotlight. She paused beside it and looked out at the audience. She found her mother in the front row. Rosa was crying, her hand pressed to her heart. Beside her, Richard was smiling, his eyes shining with pride. Elena took the microphone from its stand. The applause faded, and silence filled the hall. Before I play, she said, her voice steady but soft, I want to say something. She looked down at the piano, then back at the crowd. 4 years ago, I thought my dream was over. I walked away from music because I had to choose between my future and my mother's life. It wasn't a hard choice. I would make it again in a heartbeat, but I thought that was the end of my story. She paused, taking a breath. I was wrong, because sometimes, when we least expect it, someone comes along who sees us, really sees us. Not what we've become, but what we could be. 6 months ago, a man walked into the restaurant where I worked. He didn't know me. He had no reason to care about me, but he asked me to play, and that one simple request changed my life. She looked at Richard in the front row. I never got to thank you properly. So I'm thanking you now, in front of all these people. Thank you for believing in me when I had stopped believing in myself. Thank you for giving me a second chance. Richard nodded slowly, his eyes wet. Elena set the microphone down and turned to the piano. She sat on the bench and placed her fingers on the keys. The hall was completely silent. 2,000 people holding their breath. She didn't play Chopin this time. She played something new. A piece she had composed herself over the past few months. It was called Second Chance, and it told her story without words. The struggle, the sacrifice, the loss, and finally, the hope. The music filled Carnegie Hall, rising to the ceiling and wrapping around every person in the room. It was beautiful and heartbreaking and triumphant all at once. Elena played with everything she had, pouring her entire soul into the keys. In the front row, Rosa sobbed quietly, clutching her roses. Richard sat perfectly still, tears streaming down his face. And all around the hall, strangers cried together, moved by a young woman who had lost everything and found it again. When the final note faded, there was a moment of pure silence. Then the audience erupted. People leaped to their feet. The applause was deafening. Flowers were thrown onto the stage. Elena stood and bowed, tears finally falling freely down her cheeks. She looked at her mother, at Richard, at the thousands of faces shining with emotion. She had been given a second chance, and she had made it count.